7 defeats in 10 in the Championship for Norwich City. Most goals conceded, free-falling down the Championship table. David Wagner remains at the wheel for now, but how do Norwich City get themselves out of an almighty rut that they find themselves in? Welcome to the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy Davitt, and we meet after, and I'll tell you the time we're recording this because things could change. Events, dear boy, events. 1:30 on a Sunday to dissect and reflect on a dismal Norwich City defeat away at Sunderland. 3-1 loss compounds all of the issues that they have at this moment in time. And as I said, Paddy, David Wagner may remain at the wheel, but the wheels have well and truly come off.
Yeah, so I wasn't building up the suspense. I was just looking for the unmute button there, Connor. It's end of the line stuff, I think, as we both kind of went with in our various post-match outlooks and reflections. And it's hard to escape that he has, as a head coach in charge of Norwich City, probably reached the end of his usefulness. And it's now increasingly about the what next and who's framing that what next and what it looks like, because you said it there in the intro, 7 defeats in 10. For all the obvious mitigation with certain injuries to key players, that's way below 17th in the table as we stand. Is a long way short of we have a group of players under a head coach who are capable of challenging for promotion. So, and the manner of it again, the fact that they even went ahead against Sunderland, it wasn't a situation like midweek, Middlesbrough, or some of the other games where they're trying to make up ground and you can see the brittleness and the lack of confidence. And it's, well, they're falling behind. Fresh adversity, this group won't be able to deal with it. No, they actually got their noses in front, having had to dig in and probably get into that in due course about the sort of way he went structurally in terms of the lineup and the approach. Very circumspect, but in terms of what you want as an away team, you managed to soak up what Sunderland were offering in that first quarter and then scored a very good goal on the counter. And even in that setting where you're 1-0 up, creating 1 or 2 chances thereafter, they were not able to even get to half-time ahead. And then thereafter, second half was everything that is wrong with it in terms of the lack of energy, intensity, lack of ideas. Again, this feeling that he's just throwing players into the mix now. I mean, they ended up with Adamida, Wang, Nunes, Borja Sainz and Onel Hernandez on the pitch. And you end up with Kenny McLean at centre-back, and he's involved, sadly, in the match-sealing goal from the penalty spot for Sunderland. Just everything that could go wrong is summed up and typified by that performance. And then obviously, we speak to David after the game and he looked a beaten man. I've said that after the game immediately. Just his body language, so downcast, so damn beat, avoiding eye contact, when he was responding to questions. Everything that isn't normally him. He normally is such a positive, enthusiastic character, and he looked beaten, really. So, of course, he'll plug on until he's told otherwise. But it increasingly feels with Blackburn at Carrow Road now to come a week today that it's when rather than if, and that's ultimately I think where this club has got themselves to, and it isn't all rest in one head coach, because I'm sure changing the head coach, Gary Gowers has written an excellent piece earlier today on MFW. I'd advise you to go and digest that, and it sort of maps out that it isn't just about replacing the head coach. This is bigger, this is deeper. It's a malaise, and it has been for pertinently, because we're more or less two years on now from Stuart Webber sat in a dressing room at Brentford dispensing with the services of Daniel Farker, and from that point onwards on the pitch, and you have to say off the pitch, it hasn't been good. The product hasn't been good. Failure. That Premier League season, failure. Last season in the Championship, failure this season. And everything they've tried to do hasn't worked. And really now it's going to be a reset, because by definition, Stuart Webber will depart at some point between now and the end of this year, and Ben Napper will come in. And we know above that, the situation with the Americans and increasing their shareholding. So there is change. There is change on the way. We are in a period of change, but it feels like it needs a top to bottom reset, and that every aspect of this football club, I think, they need to refresh it and renew it and inject some energy and some dynamism, because at the minute it's just I think you said in one of your video verdicts, it's a bit of a sleepwalk into a dark place, from which it could get a lot worse. Certainly in terms of league status, they've been there before. Club not too far away who are clearly going in the opposite direction. They've been there before. These things can happen if you don't arrest the regressive trends, which have been there now for 2 years, really. So this isn't a new situation. It's more of the same, and it will end inevitably with David Wagner's dismissal at some point. But it doesn't end there. It's going to have to take more than a new head coach. It basically needs as I say, for me, quite a major reset. And Ben Napper has got a hell of a job on his hands.
Yes, indeed. And we will dissect all of those relevant strands that Paddy has kind of picked out already there in terms of the structure of the club, David Wagner in particular. But I think it's right that we do start with the game, and we do talk a little bit about the game, because there was a game of football to be played yesterday. Norwich City were beaten 3-1 by Sunderland pretty comprehensively in the end, to be honest. They took the lead, which I think shocked us all when Callum Fisher, who was one of the few bright sparks of a dismal day at the Stadium of Light, used Gabriel Sarra's kind of offside run, I guess, as a little bit of a decoy to latch onto a ball, cut it back for Hwang Yu-zhou, who again I felt in patches was pretty good yesterday, to put Norwich 1 up. And then from there, Paddy, it was a regular story. 3 goals, 3 really soft goals from a Norwich City perspective. A really interesting approach. David Wagner went for a 4-5-1. It was a containment mission, which is fine until you start losing the game, and then it becomes a rescue mission. You don't necessarily have the tools or the mindset to change that. And I think we saw that on a few occasions with Chris Shuton when he was in charge at Norwich City, and how difficult that can be to spring from one approach to the other. They didn't do that successfully. And then obviously it's an individual error at the end by Shane Duffy that the brilliant Jack Clark seizes upon, and Kenny McLean, playing as the centre-back at that point, concedes a penalty. David Wagner came out after the game and described it as an okay performance. That feels generous to me. It's been, and actually I think you can look at the week as a whole, really, starting with Leeds, ending with Sunderland. By the way, I did predict Norwich to get 0 points in the last podcast we did from those 2 games, but I don't want to shout about it too much. So
how many did I go for?
2, did you? Did you go for 2 or 1? I can't remember. I think Adam went for 3, you went for 2, Sam or you might have gone for 1 actually. I can't remember, but they've ended up with 0.
Well done, Connor. A rare prediction we got right as a collective.
I know. It's incredible, isn't it? One I'd rather have got wrong, to be honest, but there we go. But this week, Paddy, the story has been similar collapses in different ways, similar performances in similar ways, similar deficiencies in similar ways. The run of form, as we've spoken about, is horrendous. I think increasingly people are just wondering when somebody at Norwich City is going to wake up and realise what they're in at the moment, because for every day that this goes on and limps on, and it can limp on till Blackburn, and Norwich might win there, but the long-term picture, as you've mapped out, doesn't look any different. It's every day that it kind of passes is a acceptance of where they're at, whether that's the intention or whether it's not. That is the action of not caring about with change. And I don't know, is this kind of view, and it's a correct view, it's accurate, that there's so much change afoot, therefore we can't change anything at the moment until that change has happened. Is that credible? Is that a position that can hold at this moment in time with Norwich City's form as bad as it is at this moment in time?
Well, I mean, if that's essentially, can they do anything before Ben Napper walks in the building, then the answer is absolutely it can. If it is, as I say, the removal of David Wagner, but the removal of David Wagner and the commencement of another search for another head coach, which that'd be 4 in 2 years, that doesn't cut it, because I think it's worth stressing, they inherit the same group of players who are underperforming massively and have done. And I know it's not exactly the same group of players, because, we were told in the summer that they'd addressed some of those mentality issues with some of the signings. They're still there. They're still there. So for me, there's players in that building who've been in the building for 2 years and more. Really have to look themselves in the mirror, and are they doing enough? Because for me, they're failing massively. And okay, it'll be David Wagner, as it was Dean Smith before him, as it was Daniel Farker before him. They'll carry the can. That's the nature of it. It's the head coach who's the front person, and if you're a player, you'll probably say, well, look, what do you expect? Look how he's setting this up. Look what he's asking us to do. Look at how open we are. Look at how easy it is to create chances against. All of that is true, but it's the same head coach who presided over one defeat from the opening 8 games, when presumably he was making the same demands on them tactically and in terms of what he wanted them to do in and out of possession. It's too easy for a player to sit there and push it all in the direction of David Wagner, and that's my concern, is that he's gone. It's just a case of when, rather than if. But the new incumbent, they inherit the same group of players. So now you could say, well, is that are the players not good enough? And maybe a few too many of them are, and the balance is wrong, that we've tipped too far the other way. Go on, Con.
I get the argument of which is, and you're right, they're underperforming. However you cut it, they're underperforming. But I don't buy this squad is 17th in the championship bad. I think you can make a case that they're a mid-table championship team, but they're not one that should be 3 points off 21st in the table and looking over their shoulders. The quality that they have in that dressing room, and just your point on the players, I thought that it was really poor yesterday, actually. That and how these things are decided, I don't know, but I personally felt a senior professional should have been coming out and speaking after that performance, be it Kenny McLean, be it Shane Duffy, be it Ben Gibson, be it any of those experienced pros in that dressing room. It shouldn't have been up to Hwang Yu-zhou, who's a lone player who really hasn't done particularly well in English football so far. Yes, he scored his first goal. I get there was a positive narrative there, but I felt he shouldn't have been the player that was put up to speak about. So for all of the attention that is on David Wagner, and quite rightly, ultimately the buck stops with him. The group is underperforming. Tactically, they're all over the place. I think when you produce a performance as Norwich did yesterday, where you kind of abandon everything that made you successful as a head coach in terms of pressing and intensity and aggressiveness, and you go to that, which is essentially chasing a result.
But there's no long-term into that. Sorry, Connor, to cut across, but you know what that is? As you're talking there, I'm thinking about it. It's Farker in his final Carrow game against Leeds, where he completely abandoned his slavish adherence to 4-2-3-1 and possession-based football.
And once you do that, you're done. You're done as a head coach, because you cannot. It's not sustainable to go and chase short-term results by essentially trying to put men behind the ball and completely changing what you're about. If you lose that identity, I just don't see what you have left. Even you could even say, and I know people want to argue about Dean Smith's footballing philosophy, but even that last game at Luton where he played a free at the back and it was stodgy and horrendous and it didn't look well coached. Same with Norwich, really. I mean, the defensive numbers at the moment are horrendous. They're bottom in the championship in terms of expected goals against. They concede so many big chances. Not all of it because of the way they're set up. To be fair, you only have to look at what Shane Duffy did yesterday for the third goal. There are individual mistakes that are contributing to that as well, but just everything about Norwich City on the pitch at this moment in time feels broken. I mean, I was listening to Canary Call, as I often do on my. I'm a glutton for punishment, so I like to do that on a Sunday morning on my dog walk. And Stephen Elliott, I thought was excellent on there. To be fair, former Norwich striker, and he was speaking how in his view, and it is only his view, he felt some of the players had given up towards the end of that game. How there wasn't the same willingness to track back and recover. I mean, some of this is on the players as well, Paddy, isn't it? In terms of the responsibility that they take as a really senior dressing room, because as David Wagner highlighted yesterday, it's the senior professionals that are as culpable for this as anybody else.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, and as I say, it is a different mix this time around, but there are characters in that dressing room who've been there for the last 3 seasons and more now. They stank out the Premier League, they stank out the Championship to finish, a long way short of the top 6 in the final analysis last season, and the 17th as we sit here now. And that's different head coaches in all of those three phases I've talked about there. The common denominator is a lot of the same players, And that isn't a free pass for the managers. Yes, of course, David Wagner needs to be getting more out of the available resource as Dean Smith, as Daniel Farke towards the back end there. But you cannot dismiss that part of as we try and problem solve this or try and at least apportion where things are unravelling. Of course, we can get into the hierarchical aspects of Stuart Webber still being there, but is he still, fully plugged in, and the Ben Napper situation and all of that, which, contrary to, as David Wagner wasn't going to say anything different when I asked him on Friday, but it isn't a distraction, he said. It isn't underpinning this poor cycle of results, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help this sense, because externally it feels like a club in limbo, a club drifting, and they will counter that until they're blue in the face. But that's how it projects outwards, and all of those are factors. But if we're narrowing the focus to why are they so poor at the moment, the players have to take full responsibility from that. Now, in contrast to, as I say, one defeat from the first 8, we're looking at that recruitment in the summer again, and Fashnacht, Duffy, even Stacey dropped yesterday, Danny Bart, Adam Forshaw. You question again this recruitment, as we know, famously the recruitment was questioned going into the second tilt at the Premier League, and and ultimately it doesn't look like it's had the desired effect as we sit here right now. 7 defeats in 10. So there's a myriad of factors in play. There's so many strands that need to be pulled together, and there's still, even once you do all that, there's probably still just some intangibles. Why are they falling the wrong side of it in so many situations? But for me, it does all come back to the same point, that really from the point Daniel Farke departed, it feels like, and I wrote about this ahead of Daniel's return the other day, for Stuart Webber, it just feels, something died that day in terms of the project and the purity of it and what they were standing for. You look at the recruitment this past summer, you look at that squad profile now, that's so far removed from what Stuart Webber came in on that ticket. In fact, it's basically what he inherited, which he was very keen to get away from. Yet we're back here again. The style of play, what this Norwich DNA was and how they wanted to play football and what they stood for, and how every team below the senior team would want to play in a similar vibe. What's this now? What is this that's been served up? And it just feels, increasingly it's hoping for something to change, rather than as it was when it was really good under Webber and really good under Farke. We're so clear in what we're trying to achieve with this football club. And yes, there's challenges, huge challenges to overcome in terms of the financial picture, and almost they had no choice but to go down the route of youth development and trusting young players and exposing them earlier than they probably should have been. But there was such an uncluttered thinking or thought process, to what they were trying to achieve, and it came together perfectly, and the results were, as we know, 2 attempts in the Premier League, and in a sense that they were ahead of the curve. They're so far behind the curve now. I mean, you look how, I know they got beat at the weekend, but Middlesbrough, when they came to Carrow last weekend, and under Michael Carrick, and that what they're trying to do, it's clear. You can see an identity to what they're all about as a football club. I think Tony Mowbray is trying to instill that in Sunderland as well. You talked about excellent young players like Clark, and Plymouth, earlier in the season. I know it's going to be a hell of a struggle for them to sort of kick on from what they did in League One, but they've come up with an identity that what they're all about. They understand it. The players, the coaching staff, it feels, maybe off the pitch as well. We got the sense, at Home Park, that just off the pitch, they're all as one. They're all pulling in the same direction. And dare we say it, Ipswich as well, even from afar, what they're doing is clearly signalling it's a club rallying behind McKenna and his leadership, and everybody's buying into it. Supporters, club personnel, players, coaches, the people above them in positions of power. Can you honestly say, on the evidence of the last 2 years, that is the case at Norwich City Football Club? It's so far removed from it. And we know that because we can contrast it with how good it was 18, 19, even 20, even the Premier League season, albeit it was a failure, but there was periods there where it was good, and then the following season, albeit behind closed doors with the pandemic. But again, a club who we know what we're about, we know what we're striving to achieve, we're all on the same page. That isn't where this club has been in the last 2 years, and symptomatic of that is what we're now seeing, or what we're not seeing really on the football pitch, in terms of performances and results. And as I say, yes, there will be a head coach change at some point in the near future, but Ben Napper really, it's a cultural change, I think, is what we need now. It's a cultural shift, and just an identity. What are Norwich all about? What are they striving to achieve? What are they as a football team, and as a set of players and a head coach? And until we get that, then I think it's going to be a fairly rocky road. I really do.
It's a rejection of the process, isn't it? That's what's gone. It's a chase for results, which is, as you said, when Stuart Webber came in, and the idea was you were meant to move away from that. It was meant to be about building structures, building plans, building future proofing, I guess, in many ways, but also having a clear playing identity. Well, that's gone. Norwich don't have that anymore. Having players that excite and grow and leave the club and earn them a lot of money in doing so. Well, beyond Gabriel Sara and John Rowe, there's nobody in a yellow and green shirt at the moment that is doing that, nor many in this summer's recruitment who have a huge sell on anyway. It kind of got trapped in the 2017 cycle again. It feels like there's become this obsession with getting promoted without a plan as to actually how they're going to do that. It's just kind of throwing enough mud at the walls and hoping something sticks. And I guess, Paddy, because we can speak about David Wagner and we can speak about his position, his shortcomings. I think everyone is on the same page now. That is a head coach that is on the thinnest of ice. He's not going to last. There will be a change at some stage. So then the spotlight gets shone upon the people higher than that. Or as you say, we're sat here. We're not quite 24 hours at the full-time whistle. Something could yet still happen. It hasn't yet, but you could say, why hasn't that change been made yet? When everyone can see that for various reasons. But I think deeper than that, you referenced Stuart Webber. There's been some reports that emerged early on Sunday morning that his Norwich City exit could be accelerated in the next couple of weeks. We understand that's not going to be the case, and that he will be here, as you mapped out earlier, when Ben Napper arrives. But the general governance and structures, that you've got a sporting director who resigned in March, still in position, but also having overseen what was a crucial summer for the football club, having taken the recruitment down a very special path that was kind of against everything that had gone before it. They hadn't signed an outfield player over 30 before this summer. They're going to have 7 by Christmas of the new recruits. A head coach who's on a 1-year rolling deal, again, kind of directing that style of play. I get that there's change, but that shouldn't be allowed to excuse kind of what has happened in recent months, should it, Paddy? Albeit a very good start, but that's proven to be almost a bit of a red herring. The rest of it, at the end of last season and this run that we're in at the moment, is nothing short of abysmal. 6 wins out of 24.
Yeah, and that will ultimately do for David Wagner. But even in the very specific stream of Stuart Webber's remit, which is appointing head coaches, he's got Farker right. Did he get Dean Smith right? Did he get David Wagner right? No, is the answer. So, and in terms of and again, it all comes back to a sense that they lost their way as a football club, because you're drawing up a profile of head coach, and the first one he went for when he was fresh in the door, Daniel Farker, that's not Dean Smith, that's not David Wagner. And from
it's lurching, isn't it? It's lurched in styles, in profiles. It's all over the place.
I mean, really, you look at it, and at the point that Daniel departed, around about this time 2 years ago, it feels now increasingly as more and more distance gets put between it, and we look at the body of decisions that have been made and the direction that they've tried to take the football club, that almost there was a rejection under that model, and this type of head coach playing that style of football with the quality of player that they could feasibly attract in terms of the finances / develop their own. They were never going to succeed in the Premier League, so they had to do something different. And that essentially has coloured everything subsequently. That's why Dean Smith was brought in, because he was seen to be somebody who'd been over the course and distance in the Premier League and could keep them up. That was the brief. Clearly, they felt, this is a guy, and by hook or by crook, however he does it, that'll do for us. It didn't happen. Then, of course, you locked into him in the Championship. It didn't happen in the Championship, and then you twist again. And and obviously David Wagner, given their previous association and what he'd achieved at Huddersfield in terms of the similar brief. Can you get a team out of the Championship and get them into the Premier League and keep them there? He had that on his CV, so they've gone that route. But it clearly hasn't
Should
worked.
they have looked at his last 2 jobs though, Paddy? I know there's lots of mitigation at Schalke, but he got sacked from both of his last 2 jobs in similar circumstances. Schalke was a terrible, I think it might have been 16, possibly even 18 games without a win that did it for him there. And I know he's spoken about, and we've spoken about the mitigation of all sorts of shenanigans going on behind him. But ultimately, there was a team there that very similar, actually, got themselves into a really poor run, and he was unable to find the tools or the solutions to turn it around. Young Boys was slightly different, but he still got sacked from that post, having underperformed. You could weigh it up and say, really, he got the Norwich City job based on a job that he'd done, 4 years ago now, really.
Well, and allied to that, Dean Smith was in post a week after he'd been dismissed by Aston Villa. So you wouldn't say his stock was particularly high. We're not party to the thought process of Stuart Webber undertook in both of those managerial searches, but clearly those should have been factors that were in the mix. How much weighting you attached to it or not is another matter. But the fact that he went ahead and appointed, though, I mean, we know as soon as, because of the way it's, subsequently came out, that as soon as Dean Smith, I think it was, if I got it right, I think Daniel went on the Saturday that weekend in November 2021, and I think Dean Smith was gone on the Sunday.
That's right, yeah.
As soon as Dean Smith departed, he was their number one choice. There was no other in the field. We know there was the sort of flirtation with Frank Lampard, as we're led to believe, and 1 or 2 others, but Dean Smith was his man. So that tells you there wasn't a considered process of weighing up all the candidates. No, that they felt that Dean Smith, or Stuart Webber felt, Dean Smith was the man. It didn't work out, and likewise, I guess he could lean into that personal relationship he'd had with David in a very, against the odds story at Huddersfield. But as it's turned out, maybe he should have, as you rightly map out there, Connor, subsequently, since David left Huddersfield, it hasn't gone well for him. And whatever the mitigation, he's failed in Germany, if we want to be completely brutally honest. And in terms of what Young Boys bar was that he had to clear, that they deemed he was a failure there. So as everything in football, Webber in 18-19 could do no wrong. He was a footballing visionary who'd almost reinvented the wheel, and coveted probably by much bigger clubs as somebody who was redefining his craft. A very, still in that period of English football, still quite a new novelty / phenomena. The sporting director, the technical director, he was seemingly put on a pedestal as this is what clubs in England now need to aspire to. We roll it on, and his legacy and his personal brand is far more bruised than it was 2 years ago, and that's just the nature of decisions that he has made that he will have to live and fall by. That clearly, in Norwich's context, haven't worked out, because here we are, 17th in the Championship. That with an aging squad. Yes, we know all about the infrastructure legacy that he will leave at Colney, and no one can dispute that. But even in terms of developing younger talent, unless there's some real good cohorts coming through at much younger age groups, it doesn't feel that there's a conveyor belt ready to pop into the first team anytime soon. So, and even if there was, will they get opportunities? Because, ahead of them now is a bit of a logjam of rather senior, experienced professionals. And it, as I say, it just feels increasingly that, we've had, there's talk that we're in a holding pattern now. It feels like we may have been in a holding pattern from the moment Daniel Farke was dismissed, really, in terms of what Norwich are, what they stand for, what they're striving to achieve. And, we're now going to move forward in a new era by dint of it's Stuart Webber leaving the field and Ben Napper coming in. But, he has such a challenge, really, to get this club on the up again, because clearly, if you speak to, and we don't need to go to the sharpest of social media parts of the spectrum with the Norwich fan base, who are very kind of, as we know, in certain respects, reactionary in their viewpoints. I mean, I think even if you were to speak maybe to the more measured parts of the Norwich fan base, and maybe the ones who just got a car and just want to enjoy watching their team play and are not, it's not the fractiousness that maybe you get in certain elements of social media. But even those people, I think, would say, hand on heart, that they're not enjoying watching their team play and haven't done for 2 years or more. And it was interesting. I spoke to a colleague here earlier, and he said that his father, who'd been a long-standing season ticket holder, isn't anymore. He was at the recent Birmingham game, which was, a rare Carrow Road win in this recent period. He said that was the first time he'd seen Norwich win at home since before the pandemic. And, that's just not acceptable, really. For a club without any sense of entitlement, but Norwich should be better than 17th in the Championship, far better. For a club who've had their successes in recent times and have had exposure to the Premier League and all that comes with it in terms of the finances, to now be presiding over a club of 17th, that's mismanagement from top to bottom. And it's not just on Stuart Webber, that's mismanagement across the board.
Well, this is what I was going to come up to, really, because we can talk about David Wagner and we can talk about that decision, and we'll maybe come back to it in a moment, because there's some kind of stuff that I want to speak about around that. But this has to go right to the top of the football club, doesn't it? Because and you've got change at that level as well. And I don't think anyone's kind of disputing that. But I think it's fair to say at most football clubs, dare I say all football clubs, in maybe not all, but certainly the vast majority of, would somebody who has resigned in March still be in post 6 months later, having overseen a really important transfer window, and basically says, well, I'll leave on my terms when I say I'm going to leave? Or would they, and I get obviously there's a process that you have to replace them and whatnot, but would that be allowed to happen? Would there be this kind of situation, as you said, where even if it's a perception, where this perception of limbo it exists, where this period of or this perception of indecision is allowed to exist as well? Ultimately, cultures are set right at the top. So does this have to go on Norwich City's current majority shareholders and the people who ultimately have the say and pick the people who are appointed at this football club? Are they culpable for partly some of this mess that Norwich City find themselves in at the moment?
Well, I mean, yes, in a nutshell. I mean, on the specific point of, I can't think of any club, certainly at the top end of the English game, that would have had a scenario whereby essentially the day-to-day footballing figurehead, which is what he is and has always been, frames when he's going, how he's going, what it looks like, and communicates.
Does he have, just on a separate point, but does he have enough credit in the bank to do that, do you think? I think it's a bit different 2 or 3 years ago, but given everything that's transpired subsequently, last season where the whole club underperformed by they wanted a top 2 finish, they finished 13th. Does he have enough credit in the bank to do that and to say that? Should he have enough credit in the bank to say and do that?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer that, but I think what you have is kind of, this is the byproduct of the relationship that is developed between Stuart Webber, primarily, Delia and Michael. When it first came together, and he then had the success that he subsequently had, it's hard to underestimate or overestimate just what a job those two felt he'd achieved. The financial turnaround, the brand of football, the winning element of the football. 2 titles at Championship level. As I say, the first Premier League season, albeit it ended in failure, but there was signs there that, okay, well, if we go down and come back again, we'll be better equipped next time around. I mean, all of that, and it flows into what I said earlier. Not just within Norwich circles, but within English football. 18, 19, 19, 20, that period, Stuart Webber was put on a pedestal within the game as this is a groundbreaking individual in terms of the position he occupies in a high level English football club and the achievements that he's brought from a pretty poor hand that he received. A squad that was well past its sell-by date, infrastructure that was tired and dated, and financially, really in a pretty desperate place to from that raw material to achieve what he did. I know for a fact, because I both observing them at close quarters, how they interact with each other, and speaking to people in and around the football club, that his star could not have been higher in the eyes of Delia and Michael. And I think that relationship, despite, as you say, quite rightly, the trajectory has alarmingly dipped. I think that is at the core of this. That I'm not saying it's gratitude from either party, although Stuart has often talked about the debt he felt to those two to initially give him that opportunity, and then back in maybe after that first season, which it's worth reiterating wasn't a very successful season. 15th, was it, and below Ipswich. They stuck with him. He's spoken about that subsequently, that could have been the point where they turned around and said, "You've had a season, this isn't really working, we're going to go in a different direction." But they backed him again, as they did initially when they went out and headhunted him. So, it's hard to underestimate how deep that relationship is, that interpersonal relationship, not just employer / owner of a football club and an employee. Is far deeper than that. And to the point where I think they've always had this understanding that Stuart would be very hands-on in terms of the handover, in terms of the transition. He said himself he never would leave them in the lurch. He would never leave them kind of, I'm here today, I'm gone tomorrow. And that's obviously bled into how we've got this contractual situation that's been put in place, whereby he could go to them in March, say, "No, this is me done now, I'm checking out. But obviously I'm here for the next 12 months, or at least for as long a portion of that as you need to find a replacement." And then even now, where we find ourselves, that he's willing to, contrary to that report earlier today, hang around beyond Ben Napper's arrival for whatever period of time they feel they need to work together to pass the baton on. So all of that is very unusual, dare I say it, unique in English football. So, you can argue the rights or the wrongs of it. At the minute, it feels like, as I say, it's just contributed to this sense of somebody make a decision, somebody get a handle on this, and let's move the dial. Let's not, dance around it, because the product on the pitch requires some urgent surgery and some radical decisions, I think. But that's why we are where we are, I think, because, the seeds of this are in what he achieved, given the free rein he was given by Delia and Michael from 17, 18 onwards. That's why we're at this situation. Rather than, why have they allowed it to get to this point? I think it's just a continuation of a relationship which, even now, even for all the failure that has unfolded on the pitch, particularly, you could argue in terms of recruitment as well, that they still believe very much so that they believe Stuart Webber is the right person to manage this process.
So this comes back to the point that I think a lot of Norwich fans are getting at, which is, if David Wagner has to go, who gets rid of him?
Well, I mean, if it's this side of Ben Napper's official start date, then it'll be Stuart Webber overseeing that, with Neil Adams, with sign off from all the board, and it was Stuart Webber with Neil Adams, with the board, who would have to put a plan in place, whether it's an interim holding situation while they conduct another managerial search. But let's be honest, I mean, Ben Napper will be the one who inherits that. So this idea that he'd have no input into a head coach cycle ending and a new one starting is for the birds, really. I mean, that's the most important decision that he will have to get right. It was the most important decision that Stuart Webber had to get right when he first walked in the door, and boy, did he get it right when he recruited Daniel Fargo, because from that and their personal chemistry, everything else flowed outwards. So, there's no doubt about it that if they're looking to make a change, then there will have to be some input from Ben Napper, and what that looks like, and if there's a contractual element in terms of his exit from Arsenal, why it has to be November the 27th. We can only go on the point that was put directly to David Wagner on Friday. Is in the current situation Ben Napper's start date been brought forward, and he said to the best of his knowledge that wasn't the case. He talked about him still being on holiday and needing to recharge his batteries and looking forward to working with him from the 27th onwards. But as you said, events, dear boy, events. And, if David is still in charge against Blackburn, and I don't wish this on him, but if the result and the performance is more of the same, then what's the reaction going to be of 23,000 fans at Carrow Road here on Sunday? Their hand will be forced, I'm sure. And if that is the case, then where do you go from there? Because technically, Ben Napper still isn't started his new role. So, it's hard to envisage. I know about, as I say, that his official start date is that, but it is hard to envisage that in the here and now, in both now this side of Blackburn, and certainly if it was still David Wagner in charge post Blackburn, that he isn't involved in a more active role with what the thinking is in terms of Stuart Webber and Neil Adams and the rest of the power brokers in the respect of the head coach situation.
And just to draw a parallel, I think to a different situation, to prove that Norwich City can sack head coaches in managers in these type of situations. I keep coming back to the Alex Neil situation when he was sacked. I mean, at that point, Norwich didn't have a sporting director. They were preparing themselves for a lot of change, maybe a slightly different situation in terms of they had they didn't. I don't think they did have a CEO at that point, did they? But
I think it might have been Ed Balls from memory. Sorry,
yeah.
Ed, if you're watching, listening, but I'm pretty sure he was the one who had to. Maybe with one or two others. Yeah,
that's what I mean. But they didn't have a sporting director, but they knew they were going to go to that model. Neil's sacking was part of moving to that to that model. So they have been in sort of this position before where they're gearing up for change and removed head coaches, stroke managers. So I think that there is a precedent to it. And just looking ahead to Blackburn next Sunday, Paddy, because until we're told otherwise, it will be David Wagner in the dugout. Much with Dean Smith, really, does there become a humane point to all of this? Is it right? Is it fair? Is it necessary even to make David Wagner have to go through that? Because it doesn't feel like it. I mean, given what you said there earlier about him looking pretty broken and whatnot, and of course there's an element of control. He could decide to remove himself from that situation. Of course he could, but realistically, in this day and age, we don't see managers do that. And quite frankly, why should they? When there's a financial element attached to it, but. Is that a fair thing to do, given the atmosphere will be the atmosphere? We all know what it's going to be like. It's not going to be nice, particularly if Norwich go a goal down, which is entirely plausible the way they're playing at the moment, maybe even 2 down. And then it becomes to a point where it's so toxic, and it's obviously live on TV as well. Does that all need to play out? It feels to me a little bit unnecessary at this stage.
Yeah, no, agreed. And on a human level, it's hard not to warm to Wagner now.
Yeah.
And I don't want to draw a parallel with Dean Smith, but in terms of, I think he did make great play, and it's his natural character anyway to repair those very damaged bridges with the fan base, and managed to do that in the first part of his reign, and certainly the start of this season as well. That I think they did feel a closer connection to their football club and their team on the pitch. And he was front and centre of that process. But that won't insulate him, and hasn't done now. I mean, even the 1,000 fans or so at Sunderland on Saturday, you could hear the Wagner out chants towards the end. We heard them towards the end at Carrow Road in the last couple of games. So he is the visible, sadly for him, the visible representation of all that is wrong with this football team and this season from a Norwich perspective right now. So, yeah, there's no doubt he will if he's in the dugout and things aren't going well. You have to face that on a probably greater volume than so far. I'd be amazed if we get to the vitriolic element of the Dean Smith and coincidentally Blackburn home game. If you remember, I know Luton was the game that did for him on that Boxing Day, but the game before that was the tipping point, really, when I don't recall in all the time I've been going to Carrow Road an outpouring of real genuine anger directed towards a head coach as it was filtered towards Dean Smith on that particular occasion. I don't think we'd get, even in the current downward turn, I don't think we'll get there with David Wagner this weekend if that scenario sadly played out. But I think it will do for him in terms of if they lose the game, because the reaction will be sufficiently negative that there will have to be seen in terms of City's top brass a reaction to that. It won't be enough to, circle the wagons, let it blow over a few days, and then roll on to Cardiff away, and then into an international period. I think, it feels like it's as to go right back to the start of this discussion. We're at the end of the line with David Wagner anyway, and it's just the when rather than the if. But for reasons around, what does a replacement look like? Is there a plan in place for that in terms of an interim situation? How long will it take to put that in place? The Ben Napper dimension that we've discussed in the last segment, maybe even the Atanasio and the American dimension, and in terms of the joined-up strategy that needs to come together now over the coming days, that might all ensure that, we roll into Blackburn and it is David Wagner still in charge. So, but on a purely human level, even yesterday, and the last recent media sort of conferences we've had with him, at no point has he shied away from, I'm the front man, I take the blame, criticise me, I understand it, I deserve it, I merit it because the results and performances haven't been good enough. And, there's been no, I don't get any sense that he's tried to pull the wool over people's eyes or, hide behind, well, we're out Sargent, we're without Barnes, what do you expect kind of thing. He's tried to do what he feels is right in terms of his team selections and setups and the way he's gone about it. It hasn't proven to be the case. As we've said earlier on, let down, I think, by certainly experienced senior players. The catalogue of individual errors on this run, really, it's hard for any coach to sort of manage your way through that if you've got players who can't do the basics right and making poor decisions at key moments in games. But ultimately, he is responsible for setting the tone and the direction of travel, and unfortunately, it's all in a southward direction at the minute. So, yeah, it won't be a pleasant experience for him primarily, but for anybody who's at Carrow Road to have to go through. And if you're a fan, go back to what I said earlier. These season ticket holders, the ones who turn up at Carrow Road, they want to enjoy. They want to enjoy their team playing. They want to have a release from maybe their own sort of day-to-day sort of troubles and pressures, job pressures, family pressures, whatever. You're not getting that. You're not getting that from Norwich. If anything, they're contributing to the issues, and that's not what following your football team should be all about. And if that is the case, then something has gone wrong, and something is going wrong at that football club, and we can all see it. And and it's not an emotional reaction to it, as I say. Totally uncompetitive second time round in the Premier League. Not good enough, mid-table obscurity last time in the Championship, and now nearer the bottom than they are to the top. The rot has set in, and it needs drastic medicine and an acceptance that something has to be done differently, and a new course set, and importantly, communicated to the fan base. Because to give Stuart Webber his credit, when he first came in, he understood, and through us and media outlets like us, you have to, if you're going to take these people on a journey, i.e. your fan base, communicate what that is, what it looks like and what it feels like, and that there will be tough moments and it won't be all plain sailing, but the end goal will be rewarding and it'll be worthwhile. And boy, was it, so Ben Napper, whoever else he brings in and around him, and whoever is potentially the new head coach, understand that you need to, not only what you're striving to do internally, but message that out and communicate, because unfortunately that's something else which has gone by the wayside in the recent period. It feels like it's gone a little bit better in that direction in maybe recent months, but we all know that we've gone through a period where not only was what's going on here, it was also we're not hearing about what's going on here and what they're going to put right and how they're striving to put it right. And that was obviously something which has only magnified and contributed to this feeling of, and we used it quite often, and certain elements within inside the football club didn't like the word, but a disconnect.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good place to end the pod actually on the fans, because it was 1,100 who travelled up to Sunderland yesterday. We couldn't actually see them because of where we were sat. They were that high up at the Stadium of Light that it kind of cut off the away end. But we could certainly hear the Wagner chants. I think what we could see essentially was one block, which after the third goal was just stream after stream after stream of Norwich fan walking out of that away end. I've spoken to people who were in it. I had family in there, I had friends in there, all of whom have said it turned pretty toxic towards the end. Some telling me that they left early for obvious reasons. And I think we're in this situation where supporting Norwich City at the moment almost feels like a habit. It's that I'm not even sure it's hope, to be honest, and you should always have hope, but at the moment there doesn't really feel like any belief that this can or will change. I think there are people genuinely looking at it and, okay, Norwich might win on Sunday, but realistically, it probably doesn't change much in terms of where they find themselves as a football club, in the same way that changing a head coach probably won't do that. And I think they feel I don't want to speak for all of them. I'm sure there are people who disagree with this sentiment, but there are a majority of them, I would say, who are deeply unhappy with all of them are probably deeply unhappy with where this football club is at this moment in time, and the levels that it's dropped, and maybe even the drop of standards is a correct way to put it as well. And you're right in terms of the communication. I think there's also an element of not feeling heard and not feeling listened to, and they're calling for change, and change isn't happening, or it's not happening quick enough, or it's being prolonged, and they're not being spoken about or spoken to about why those reasons are. I mean, we're going to have some sets of accounts pretty soon, which are going to make for pretty grim reading. There's very little to get excited about or to cling on to as a Norwich City fan at the moment, on the pitch or off the pitch. All they've got really is kind of this unicorn of change in the distance, and nobody really knows what that looks like or what it feels like. And one thing is for sure is that this football club and these supporters don't expect that this season, and that's the only way that we can measure it, but the football club more broadly cannot just be left to drift and to fall and to sink and to lower itself to standards that it hasn't been at. And those people inside the football club can say they created that expectation with their success. Norwich have had success before those people arrived. They'll have success again afterwards. But at the moment, I think the feeling for the fans is that just something has got to give and something has got to change, and someone's got to grasp this. And this feeling of drift is helping nobody, and is not helping the football club ultimately. I don't know if you've got a final word, Paddy, but it's very difficult to have any sort of optimism at the moment. Not to be really, really bleak about it, but I genuinely think that's where people are at this moment in time, until maybe the changes set in and the direction of travel is laid out. I mean, it feels like we've all got to brace ourselves for what's going to be a pretty long and pretty dark winter.
Oh, that's a really, really depressing thought, that is, Connor. Thanks for that.
Go on, bring some positivity.
Well, my birthday's in November, so I've got that to look forward to. But on a purely football, as this is a football discussion, it can change. I mean, as swiftly as it's gone the other way, it can change again, and that's not a charter for let's keep doing the same things, because some fundamental things need to change. But in terms of the trajectory of a football team, of a football season, and then where a club is actually going in terms of the journey it's on, those things can change, but they're only going to change if you get the right people in place with the right outlook and the right cultures, and as I say, to repeat myself, they communicate what they're trying to do. And I won't talk from a fan perspective, but if I was a fan and I can see something that I like and that I can row in behind, and that has an end point, and an identity, and something that is forged on optimism and excitement, then I would give that a chance. And it might, as it was when Stuart came in and communicated that, it was bumpy. It was 15th first time round. It was, is this really working? It was below Ipswich, and they'll be below Ipswich again, sadly, this season. And but it turned very quickly in the start of that second season, and then what a stratospheric rise it was there. So you can turn things around as a football club, but it needs something radically different in outlook and approach. And obviously, Ben Napper is the embodiment of that, because he'll be a different face, a different voice. a different backstory, and he, I really hope, will communicate, where he sees his club, what his vision of Norwich City is about, and we hope that's optimistic and progressive and looking forward. Which everything in his backstory in terms of how he's made his mark at Arsenal and kind of harnessing the new trends that are in football, the data aspect of it all, and technology, that all of that can flow into what he's trying to achieve with Norwich, to set them on a path which is upward again and looking upward and looking forward, rather than, which increasingly what we will do now with Stuart Webber is, wasn't it good back in 18-19? Wasn't it good when Daniel Farke had them playing that style of football? Everything is looking backward now in terms of Stuart Webber, because he, unfortunately, is the past. We need now, as a football club, as a fan base, I'm sure, to look to the future. That's gone. That will have its own place in history, rightly. People can judge the overall impact Stuart Webber had, some good, some bad, some indifferent. But that's the previous chapter. Now it's all about what's to come, and if it is short-term pain for long-term gain, then as long as that's communicated correctly, then let's see if the Norwich fan base go for that.
Indeed. Yeah, what a situation, hey? What a situation. And the only thing I think that we can all be sure about, we don't know where this goes or how long this lasts, but one thing that is for sure, it cannot and should not go on. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been some cathartic for you. I think maybe it's been cathartic for us. We'll of course keep you updated over the next week should anything kick off or change or whatever. I'm not sure that either of us really envisage that right now, but things can change pretty quickly, as they always do in football, and we will bring that to you if that is the case. PinkUn.com, as ever, the place to go, and you can get all your subscriptions to the PinkUn Plus there as well. Thank you very much for listening, / watching, and we'll see you next week for some more Norwich City fun and games.